All right, welcome to our first lecture for Statistics 243. We're going to start by watching a movie. All right, so let's see. There we go. Stat 243Z, lecture 1. Oh, come on. I'm going to ask for a different doc cam. This is going to drive all of us crazy. Dorothy is a statistician. So my question for you is, what makes Dorothy a statistician, or what is the statistical thinking that is happening in this clip? All right, let's get some ideas. There are not going to be any wrong ideas. There are ideas that might be a little more closely aligned with what I'm thinking, but I just want to hear some of what you were thinking. What's something that you observed that lets you know that Dorothy is thinking like a statistician? Yeah. Yeah. I have a feeling. Great. We're not in Kansas anymore. This is an observation about the world. Yeah. Why do you think Dorothy said that? She didn't recognize her surroundings, but do you think she's seen all of Kansas? All right. So I don't disagree with you that she didn't recognize her surroundings, but Do you think that alone was enough to make her think I'm not in Kansas anymore? Oh, so there are Technicolor flowers, right? I mean, when this movie was made, most movies were kind of in sepia, right? The grayish, kind of golden black and white. And then the Technicolor was a filming process. I looked this up. It's pretty interesting how they did it. And so she starts off in sepia gray tone Kansas, and then she wakes up and she sees Technicolor flowers. And would you say, show of hands, how many of you think like this was kind of what made her think that she has a feeling she's not in Kansas anymore? I think so, right? Yeah. So viewing these Technicolor flowers, that was like the data she collected. We often think that data should be numerical, but data is not numerical necessarily. It's just information. So she collected some information. Would you be surprised to walk outside today and see brightly colored flowers? Why did you say no? I'm not saying names just because we're recording, but otherwise I'd call you by your name. Yeah, I noticed you said no. Why? Okay, yeah, right. We're in Oregon in April. I mean, if there's any time for flowers, it's now. So was it just that she saw the flowers? What was it about those flowers that made her think she's not in Kansas anymore? Could have been the type of flowers. Yep. The type, the color, the size of the flowers. We get some big flowers in Oregon in April, though. We get all sorts of variety of colors. Talk with your neighbor a minute. See if you can pin down what was it about seeing the Technicolor flowers that made her think she wasn't in Kansas anymore. All right. Any ideas? I noticed you two talking. Would you share your thought process?
Just a little unrelated, I guess, off topic a little bit, but I always thought of like Wizard of Oz as like the grayscale or sepia. That's what you said. I guess I assumed, like growing up watching that movie, that she did see in color, but that it was just for dramatic effect to like show the contrast between her living like a dull kind of like living in a dull environment with just like farmland, and then dramaticizing that by showing more of that color. But I'm not, I guess, sure exactly what it was about the flowers, other than what comes to mind right away, maybe is that they were kind of moving.
Okay, there were munchkins there. Yeah. I'm going to pick up on one thing you said specifically, which is the dramatic piece, is there was a big contrast, and the sepia to Technicolor showed a big contrast. And to put it back to statistics, what Dorothy saw was a big contrast between what she expected at home and what she actually saw. So Dorothy lived on a pig farm with her aunt and uncle. Do you think if she had woken up and saw a bunch of pigs running around, she would have said, I'm not in Kansas? I would say no, because she would expect to see that. But instead, she woke up and saw a bunch of flowers where she was not expecting to see flowers. So what I would say is that she was surprised to see the Technicolor flowers. All right, so she observed data that was surprising compared to what she would expect, or compared to what she expected. And that's statistical thinking, when we observe data and we compare it to what we expect. And if it's surprising, then there might be something interesting going on, right? It's like, oh, I'm not in Kansas anymore. If she were in Kansas, she'd find her Auntie M, and does she ever refer to uncle by name? I don't know. And go back, raising pigs, etc. But instead, it's not what she expects, and she ends up having an adventure. Now, there's one other thing I want to draw attention to, which was the specific phrase she said. Did she say, I'm definitely not in Kansas anymore? She said, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas. So she wasn't 100% sure. Right? Maybe there's a botanical garden somewhere in Kansas that has lots of really bright flowers, and she could have been there. So she observed data that was surprising compared to what she expected. She made a conclusion based on that data, but she allowed for some uncertainty. I remember I actually described this as a way last year, and then I said I should look up that clip, that actual clip, and then I was just thrilled to see exactly what she said, right, as I have a feeling. The other thing about this clip that maybe you can take away is how slow movies used to be. Like, that was about a 2-minute clip. Can you imagine watching 2 minutes of a current movie just with like flowers rotating? I like it, but you know, it is different. Um, and maybe not all of you have watched The Wizard of Oz, and that's okay. I was The Wizard of Oz, by the way. So I'm going to keep coming back to this idea. You're going to hear me say Technicolor flowers a lot. Technicolor flowers is an analogy for surprising data, right? That's how Dorothy decided she probably wasn't in Kansas, because she saw Technicolor flowers, which was not what she expected. She could either be in Kansas looking at this thing that she really doesn't expect, or I guess it's more likely that she's not in Kansas anymore. Dorothy is a statistician. On our Canvas site in week 1, well, we've got that clip, and then we've got this slideshow called Statistics Rules of 3, which I'm going to talk about now for a while. This is all up there, so if you want to take notes, you can. If you don't want to and you just want to kind of observe, that's fine as well. If you're the type of person who likes studying in slightly non-traditional ways, you can even download a crossword puzzle with the main concepts from this that may show up on some sort of assessment later in the term. So what is statistics? Statistics is the science of using data to understand systems. And I'll define the 3 key words here. So it's a science because we have rules and other guidelines to help us do statistics well. We don't just wander around with nothing in place, with no guidelines. We're going to be developing a lot of those rules throughout the term. And then at the end of the term, we're going to go through this whole slideshow again, and you're going to say, aha, I know one of the rules that we use, or I know one of the guidelines that we use to help us do statistics well. We use data, and data is information we gather. A lot of the information in this class is going to be numerical, but it doesn't have to be. It can be descriptive. It can just be observing one thing that you don't expect, like Technicolor flowers. And we use that data to understand systems. Systems is a really broad word in this case. A system can mean a population, like a big group of people. It can be a population of cats. It can be a population of cars. It can be a number of days of the year. It's just a big group of something. And systems can also mean relationships between different groups. Like the relationship between temperature and precipitation in different places, that's a system. And we can use data to study that. In Dorothy's case, the system was geography. Where was she? Right, she used data to understand. She didn't know where she was, but she could at least say, I'm not in Kansas anymore, probably. All right. They call this rules of 3 because there's 3 ideas on each of the slides. Statistics is a science, and there are 3 main scientific approaches for statistics. First of all, it's a mathematical science. We're going to use the tools of mathematics to help us work with the data. Simple mathematics like arithmetic, visual mathematics like graphs and charts, quantitative mathematics, even some pretty high-level theoretical mathematics, some theorems developed by mathematicians to understand statistics and data. And statistics is a computer science, mostly because in this day and age, the amount of data we work with is far too big to work with it by hand. So we use computing power to handle a large amount of information, and then we use something like R or RStudio to apply that computing power to our data. That's not going to load, but that's okay. The generative AI models like ChatGPT and Gemini, those are statistical models based on trillions and trillions of pieces of data. ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude are basically trained on just about the whole internet, which is zettabytes of data. I don't even know how big zetta is. It's trillions of pieces of data. And in this class, and hopefully for you all in general, the most important type of science is a social science, because the whole point of statistics is to understand systems, and those systems involve beings of some sort, whether they're human beings, different groups of human beings, animals, the environment. All of these decisions that we use data to make have an impact on society. And so it's important to consider what impact on society we have when we make decisions with data. It can be large, like the population in the United States, or it can be small, like a population of hermit crabs in a single tidal pool or a couple different tidal pools on the coast. But as people, I believe we need to consider those impacts. And so in this class, I will ask you to adopt that mindset as well. All right, anybody have questions about that? Okay, let's watch another movie. It might be an ad first.
What do you think the chances are? I like you. Just give it to me straight. Came a long way just to see Mary. Just at least you can do as well. What are my chances?
Not good.
You mean not good, like 1 out of 100?
I'd say more like 1 out of 100.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
All right, that's Lloyd. The thing about statistics is we never expect to be exactly right. There's always a chance that we're wrong. There's always a chance that what we think is not what's actually happening. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because we all can relax just a little bit. And you're going to find that I'm fairly relaxed in terms of how accurate I want you to be. For example, if you get an 89.1, to me, I could have made some mistakes in grading and you should have been a little bit higher. I'm going to be fairly relaxed about that. The hard thing is twofold. One, it does conflict with the mind that a lot of people bring into a math class like statistics, because we're used to saying there's a right answer and a wrong answer. But in statistics, we never expect to be exactly right. There's always going to be a chance. However, if we want to be more accurate, there's something very simple to do, and that's collect more data. If Dorothy wanted to be really sure she wasn't in Kansas anymore, she maybe wouldn't stop by looking at the Technicolor flowers. Probably when she met the Munchkins, she'd have more evidence. And then when Glinda floated in her soap bubble, right, that's even more evidence. So collecting more data improves our accuracy and helps us understand our systems better. When we use statistics to understand systems, it's also important to remember that statistics don't tell us why something is the way it is. It only points out that it is that way. So for example, statistics might tell us that it tends to snow more on cold days than on warm days. Now, being people of the world, we probably understand the science behind that, but statistics itself doesn't tell us that's because snow needs cold air to form. It only tells us that, yes, it does snow more on cold days than on warm days. We need another kind of science to understand why. Statistics is only the starting point. Most people don't study statistics, don't do statistics as their careers. Most people need to understand statistics to support the thing that they really care about. And that's actually a good thing. I like the science of statistics, but I worked as a public health epidemiologist. I used statistics to help me understand differences, but then I worked with my public health colleagues to understand why those differences existed. If you're going to be nursing, or if you're interested in finance or geosciences, statistics helps you understand the system, and that other science helps you understand why that system is the way it is. And on this side, the other limitation of statistics is that correlation is not causation. It's a kind of another way of saying the previous point. Just because two variables are related doesn't mean one variable causes the other one to change, right? So let me think of an example. Well, there's a pretty good example, which is the hotter the day, the more water-related accidents there are, right? Out in leaks and ponds or swimming pools, et cetera. But it doesn't mean that the temperature going up makes people more likely to have an accident. What it means is when the temperature is hotter, there's more people in the water. And when you have more people in the water, you're probably going to end up with more accidents. Right? Those are correlated, but they're not necessarily causation related. All right, let's look at our next one. I don't have any more movies for today. I'm sorry. Types of statistical significance. So in this class, we talk a lot about significance, which is basically something like importance. And there are three types of statistical significance in this class, and they go from least important to most important. So the least important one, but the one that's usually focused on the most, is what's called statistical significance. And that is the data telling me that there's something interesting going on in my system. It's a purely mathematical question. We're going to develop tools to answer this question mathematically. In fact, I'm going to say this is always a decision based on probabilities. Is there something interesting going on, right? Can I say for certain or with good confidence that it snows more on cold days than on warm days? But that doesn't tell me if it's actually practically significant, right? If it matters to whatever society I'm thinking about. Is this interesting observation actually important? Does it actually matter? For example, suppose that students who eat bananas score 0.1 points higher on their final exam out of 100. Even if that's statistically significant, does it matter? No, right? That's not going to change the grade effectively. It doesn't demonstrate different understanding. Just because mathematically we say it's interesting doesn't mean on a practical level it's interesting. So whenever we do statistics, especially in the second half of this class, the math tells us the first one, then I'm going to ask you to think about the second and the third one. The third one is ethical significance. Is it ethical to use what I've learned from the data in society? One of the disappointing things about the field of statistics is it was launched by a lot of people with racist and eugenicist views. And they used the data to try to prove differences in groups of people. And they tried to use those observed differences to oppress groups of people, which is a really bad way to use data. It's a bad way to be in general, in my opinion. And so when you get a result, not only should you think about, is it mathematically interesting? Does it have a practical importance? But you also need to think about, what does it mean if I act on this data? Should I be acting on this data? Sometimes the answer is absolutely yes, right? If you observe that children who enroll in Head Start tend to have better success in K-12 schools, then a good way to act on that would be to get more children enrolled in Head Start. But there are other things where acting on it goes against human principles. Okay. Any questions about that? All right. I think we have probably 3 more slides for today. Yeah. So we'll get a little bit more technical right now. So how we want to look at data. There's lots of different ways to look at data, and the whole point of looking at data, again, is to understand the system. This is supposed to be a spectrum. There's supposed to be arrows on either side. How do we put an arrow in? Oh, let's put an arrow right there. Boop. Whee. Oops. Something like that. Nope. Switch. There we go. I'm sorry, I'm just having fun now. There we go. All right, so we're going to look at data in 3 main ways in this class. We're going to look at raw data sometimes. Raw data gives you a lot of detail, but it takes a while to understand it. This is data set that some of you will be using this class that records patients, anonymous patients, their age group, glucose levels, the second blood pressure, systolic, asystolic, I don't know. What's the second one? Someone who's doing diastolic. Yeah. Diastolic blood pressure, a weight category, and an outcome for if they have diabetes or not. Lots of detail. I know patient 1000 is in this age range, has these measurements, is in the high weight group and has diabetes. But I could not look at this and say, what's the average glucose level? I can't even really look at this and say how many people are in the 40 to 50 age group without taking a long time. There's 2,329 observations, right? That would take me a really long time. I can't even tell you what proportion of the patients have diabetes unless I count through this one by one. So we have a high level of detail, which is really fantastic and a good way to start looking at data. But it's going to be a slow understanding of the system. On the other end, we have low detail and fast understanding. And for that, we use what are called summary statistics, which are single numbers or maybe a small set of numbers that describe the data. I'll let you get that idea down, and then I'm going to hop back to the health data. All right, so single numbers that describe, actually, I'll do this in R. I have my scratch work here. So common summary statistics are the mean, which is really just a fancy word for the average. Statisticians have come up with all sorts of, where's my color? I can't change the color. Oh, well, sorry, it's gray. I didn't want it to be gray because it's harder to read. So statisticians over the years have come up with all sorts of fancy words for statistical ideas that just, I think, serve to make things more confusing. So the mean is just the average. The median, which is the middle value, maybe the range, which is the max, the min to max, and then various measures of spread, which we'll study. And these single numbers are helpful for getting a fast understanding. So for example, I'm gonna hop over here to Posit Cloud. I'll come back if you're taking notes. Let's look at that health data. There it is, same thing as I had in the Excel file, or the Google Drive file. I can quickly find the average glucose level, 122. Now I know something about my population. I know it's centered around the value of 122. I can look at the range to show me the biggest and the smallest. Now I know that, it's centered around 122 and it ranges between 44 to 197. That didn't take me very much time, even typing. That's very fast understanding, but it gives me almost no detail, right? I don't know anything about the person who has that glucose level. I don't know how many people are close to the average. So I lose a lot of detail, but I get very fast understanding. And in the middle, we have visuals. We'll talk about a bunch of different visuals. The most common ones are histograms and bar plots and scatter plots. But visuals also include things that we might not always think of as visuals, like tables. Not the whole data, but a quick, simple table to understand the data a little bit more quickly. You'll be doing all this in R, by the way. You'll be calculating these summary statistics. You'll be making these visuals. You will be occasionally asked to look at the raw data and use that to get a high level of detail on something. But if I want to know how many patients are in each age group, I could look at the raw data and count, or I can make a table. I know the screen isn't the best for looking at this, but we'll make do. All right, so there are a lot of people in the young range, not a lot of people in the old range. I have a better understanding of my population that I used to. I don't have the same level of detail, but it's pretty quick. Or if I want to look at the spread, don't worry about that stuff. If I want to look at the glucose, I can make it as a visual and I see, okay, this is my range of glucose readings. And sure enough, it goes from about 44 to about 200. And the average is somewhere here in the 122 range. And there seems to be a lot of people kind of close to the 100 to the 120 range and fewer in the edges. I again can't tell you what person is here. Right, I may not be able to tell you what the blood pressure is of any of these people, but I have a fairly quick understanding of how those glucose numbers can spread out, where they're centered, and where they're more common and where they're less common. So this is our three main ways to look at data: raw data, visuals, and summary statistics. How are we doing? 3:40. I've talked for a while. Let's take a 5-minute break. Come back at 3:47, so make it a 7-minute break. So when we talk about the data in statistics, we talk about 3 levels. Let's see if I can zoom in. And the levels that we talk about are the population, which is every individual in the group that we want to understand. So if you think about statistics is a science of data, using data to understand systems. The population is a system that we're trying to understand. If we were able to collect data on every individual, we would refer to that as population data. So, for example, if this patient panel here was every single patient that the clinic served, that could be the population data right there. And when we calculate summary statistics, remember, summary statistics are single numbers that describe the data. At a population level, we call those summary statistics parameters. So that's a vocab word you're going to see on your homework and you're going to see in the textbook. So parameter is a summary statistic about population. It's like the mean or the average height for all Chemeketa students. Now, the thing is, the whole reason we use statistics is it's often impossible to understand a population by sampling every single individual in the population. If I want to understand the average height of Chemeketa students, it would take me a really long time to go around and measure every single Chemeketa student. Statistics arose mostly because in order to understand a population with limited resources, we collect a sample. So that smaller level, a sample, is a subset of the population. It's chosen to do statistics on. It needs to be large enough for accuracy, which in general is at least 30. In some cases, it can be smaller, but it's a good rule of thumb. That's one of our rules for doing statistics, is we try to get a sample size of at least 30. So it's large enough for accuracy, but small enough to manage. I'm not going to go out and try to measure the height of 2,000 Chemeketa students so that I can estimate the height of all 10,000, because 2,000 is still out of reach for me. When we collect data on the sample, we call it sample data. And when we calculate summary statistics, we call them sample statistics. So the book just calls it a statistic. I prefer to qualify it as a sample statistic. So the parameter is a summary statistic about population data, and a sample statistic is summary statistic about sample data. So for example, if I found the average height of every student in this room, and I was using that to try to get an understanding of the average height of all Chemeketa students, the average height of every student in this room would be sample data. Let me annotate this a little bit. Population, all Chemeketa students, population data, height of Chemeketa students, and then a population parameter, the average, which in statistics we say the mean height of all Chemeketa students. There it is. And then the sample, well, maybe it's just this classroom. And the sample data would be the height of Chemeketa students in this classroom. And then the sample statistic, and this, again, this will all be posted. All of these notes I'm taking will be posted. The sample statistic is the average height of Chemeketa students in this classroom. And it might be reasonable. I mean, just looking around and, understanding that we're all sitting down. I don't think I'm looking at the basketball team, right? Which would be a pretty bad sample if I'm trying to understand the average height of all Chemeketa students. Now, when we actually measure, I would have to go around and measure each person. And that brings us to our third level of statistics, which is the individual. A single element from the population. That could be a person or a cat or a day or a tree. Right? It doesn't have to be a human. It's whatever you're studying, the single element from that population. The data of that individual we call a variable. And when we actually measure that, we call it an observation or a measurement. So let me do this. Let me squeeze a little room in here. Hopefully you can still see it. Nope, that's probably too small, right? I can make this work. Individual, one student. Variable, height of a student, and observation, 68 inches. All right, the actual data measured on the single individual. So part of the work for your first homework will be identifying when am I looking at a population versus a sample versus an individual? When is this a parameter? When is this a sample statistic, et cetera? The rules of three crossword, right? It's just got statistics that are single numbers that help organize the data, or the type of significance concerned with using observations and conclusions from data morally in society, right? So things like that, you can match them to the actual slides and pick your words out there if that's how you want to study this. So our last slide for today is the types of statistics we're going to study in this class. And we really study three. And they're all about understanding different parts of the system. With descriptive and inferential statistics, our goal is to understand populations. So for example, collect a sample, measure the individuals, calculate a sample statistic, use that sample statistic to estimate a population parameter. And this is actually going to take us about the first half of the class or more, because we have to talk about all of these different things. I should really add in, organize the data. That's important too. It's hard to calculate a sample statistic before you organize the data. So these are the descriptive and inferential statistics. Descriptive basically means the first pieces. We collect a sample, measure the individuals, organize the data, and calculate a sample statistic. Like the average height in this classroom is 68 inches. When we use that sample statistic to estimate a population parameter, we're doing what's called inferential statistics. An inference is a reasonable guess based on some kind of data. That's exactly what Dorothy did when she said, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. She was making an inferential conclusion. Hypothesis testing is all about understanding differences. So here, usually what we do is we collect two samples and compare summary statistics to understand the difference between the two populations. So for example, are basketball players generally taller than the average population? Well, I could collect a sample of basketball players and a sample from the general population and compare the average heights of those two samples. And if they're different enough, then I would say, oh yeah, that's interesting. There's an interesting difference. And then I would say, well, does it matter? Because if they're only different by 1 inch, maybe it doesn't really matter. All right, but if they're different by 1 foot, then maybe it does matter. And then, you know, what do I do with that information? Should I value tall people more? No. Should I change the world to fit short people better than tall people? No. You know, should I encourage someone who's tall not to study something scientific, instead focus on basketball? No, right? Those are the hard questions that statistics gets us to ask, but doesn't necessarily answer. And then regression analysis. You collect a sample with multiple variables, then study how the variables correlate with each other, right? You'll be doing this with the data for your labs. For example, those of you who work with temperature and precipitation are going to study how temperature and precipitation seem to correlate with each other in different cities, And so these are the type of statistics we study in this class. There's all sorts of other types of statistics. There's what's called machine learning, which is where we use a vast quantity of data along with simple rules that we give the computer. And we basically say to the computer, I want you to figure out the relationships between all this data without any structure necessarily. And one step beyond that is artificial intelligence, where with something like ChatGPT, we give it a bunch of data and we say, if I write the words, call me, what's going to show up, right? Actually, I want to do this instead. I like this example better. Stop it. Give me a new one. Yeah, Call Me Ishmael. That's the one that always comes to mind to me. One of the most famous books in English literature, Moby Dick, right? And through predictive statistical modeling, generative AI can come up with that answer, unless you like Carly Rae Jepsen or Paul Simon, right? All of this is based on statistics, and we don't study it in this class, but the foundations are here. All right, last thing for today. On Thursday, we're going to talk about different ways to collect data and different types of data. So I figured let's get a start on it. So I'm going to put, where'd it go? If you don't have a phone with you today, that's okay. We don't need data from everybody, but go ahead and scan this QR code if you have your phone and fill out the form. And when you're done, you can leave. If you have any questions, you can come up and ask me. I'm going to stop the recording now.